I am over the moon excited about being able to speak with you about how Black entrepreneurs, their families, and their communities can fund generational excellence. So, in the next few minutes that we have together, we're going to spend some time talking about a proven process for how we can perpetuate wealth for not just the next generation, but for the next 3 generations. First things first, though, we have to stop giving our energy and giving our attention to the generational curses that we experience from unhealed pain, unaddressed trauma, and especially unspoken toxicity in our lives. So instead, let's normalize rewriting our family's narrative. Let's normalize rewriting Black history altogether. And let's normalize funding generational excellence. And who am I? Why am I the person to speak with you and walk you through this process for doing so? I am Dr. LaTanya White. I'm an educator. I spent the last 11 years teaching management, entrepreneurship, and professional leadership development courses at a prestigious historically Black college. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the founder of Concept Creative Group, which is a multifaceted business development firm that is geared towards helping Black and African American entrepreneurs grow, scale, and compete on a global level. My expertise lies at the intersection of the racial wealth gap, entrepreneurial dynasties, and an intergenerational wealth transfer. So that has led me to this point in my life where I have developed a persona as a dynastic wealth strategist. And all of this can only happen because I'm a systems thinker. I know that it's not just going to be the entrepreneurship curriculum that's going to be required for Black entrepreneurs to fund generational excellence. I understand the family dynamic. I understand the fear, the doubt, and the insecurity that often plagues us as first generation Black entrepreneurs, especially. And that is really what leads me to be the person standing here virtually before you to help you rewrite your family's narrative and help me rewrite Black history. So who this is for, if you're a first generation Black entrepreneur, then these generational curses that we talked about, the unhealed trauma, the unaddressed pain, and the unspoken toxicity, they are literally sucking the life out of not just you, but sucking the life out of your family. So as we explore this topic of funding generational excellence, I want to be sure that everyone understands that there are levels to this thing. So there's personal wealth. So if you are an entrepreneur in the audience, or if you aspire to be an entrepreneur, just take your side hustle to the next level. You may only be thinking about what that business and what that funding and revenue can do for you personally. So that's what I like to consider a focus on personal wealth. We're here today because a lot of us are interested in generational wealth. What am I doing, or what should I be doing today that is going to benefit the next generation of my family, my children, or my nieces and nephews, or even maybe my godchildren? But what we're really going to be talking about, how I'm really going to push the envelope with you tonight, is to expose you to this evidence-based concept referred to as dynastic wealth. So we'll talk more about it, but in brief, dynastic wealth comes from the consecutive passing down of either a business or the wealth that a business has created for 3 consecutive generations. So these are the levels that you have access to when it comes to generational wealth and wealth within your family. But in order to fund generational excellence, we really need to focus on dynastic wealth. So a quick comparison. How is dynastic wealth different from generational wealth? For generational wealth, it's typically only one level down. So it's typically only from me to my daughter. Whereas dynastic wealth is all levels, up, down, and across. For example, in my family, we have just begun having our dynastic wealth discussions on a regular basis. And there are 4 generations of my family that are involved in this. While I was the first entrepreneur in my family, that doesn't mean that no one else is going to be a part of or needs to be a part of how dynastic wealth is created. So it's me teaching my mom, me teaching my grandmother teaching me, my grandmother teaching my daughter, my cousins and I teaching our aunts and uncles, and vice versa, of course. And then there's me teaching my cousins along that same generation. So all levels up, for every living generation in your family, they can all be involved in this process of creating dynastic wealth. Generational wealth focuses typically on a single form of wealth. If you do any research, a quick Google search on generational wealth will typically only refer to passing down financial assets, whereas dynastic wealth focuses on 5 forms of wealth. These are forms of wealth that private wealth advisors are talking with their ultra high net worth clients in closed rooms, and it's not being taught in the classroom, because believe me, I've been there for the last 11 years, and it's certainly not being taught in mainstream media. I literally only stumbled upon these concepts, these 5 forms of wealth, by doing my dissertation research. So I'm trying to save you the blood, sweat, and tears and heartache of writing a dissertation to help you and your family fund generational excellence through dynastic wealth. So those 5 forms of wealth: financial wealth, of course, that's the foundation. If your business is not strategically priced, and if you are not profitable, there will be no dynasty. We need financial wealth in order to establish a dynasty. But beyond financial wealth, there is spiritual wealth, there is the wealth of knowledge, there is intellectual wealth, and there is relational wealth. So we're going to talk about each of those forms of wealth as we continue through the presentation. Now, getting back to generational wealth, again, it's typically just focused on the next generation. Dynastic wealth, in my study of entrepreneurial dynasties, these family businesses, or rather these business families, because those are 2 different concepts, and I'm happy to talk about the differences between those 2. But these family businesses these business families had a strategic plan that intentionally included and incorporated the next 3 generations in how they run the business and how they run the family. So we're going to get a little bit more into those things, but this is just a high level view of the differences between dynastic and generational wealth. So moving forward, I want to say this a little bit louder for the people in the back. Now, remember, this is for first generation Black and African American entrepreneurs, but more importantly, for those entrepreneurs who have a desire to create some future benefit for not just yourself, not just your family, but for your family and your community. Now, if that's the case for you, you have to make it an operational priority to begin to fund generational excellence through your business endeavors. But how do you do that, right? It sounds easy. And what I learned over the course of my doctoral dissertation was that easy and simple are 2 different things. So this is a pretty simple thing to do, but it's not going to be that easy. So this new direction that I am strongly encouraging, again, after 11 years teaching entrepreneurship in higher education, after 4 years in a doctoral program that focused on the racial wealth gap in Black entrepreneurship, and after 600 Black entrepreneurs that I've coached, taught, and consulted, the new direction that I strongly advise is to fund generational excellence through dynastic wealth. This can create 3 times more wealth for Black entrepreneurs and their families with a strategic focus on this particular concept. So, moving forward, let's talk about how entrepreneurial dynasties perpetuate wealth. We're talking here about maybe your Rockefeller families, your Walton families, some others that may come to mind, the Mars family, right? So, that first form of wealth, we talked a little bit about financial wealth, and that includes your traditional concepts for business development, entrepreneurship, branding, pricing, and profitability. But remember, these families also are being advised to cultivate four other forms of wealth, and that includes spiritual wealth. That is the very next step to building a dynasty. And what this includes is a vision for the wealth. What do you want the money? What do you want the wealth to be used for generations from now? Not just the next generation, but 3, 5, 7, 10 generations from now. So making sure that you have a vision for the wealth that your business is creating. Spiritual wealth also involves establishing an identity for the family. Now, if you don't have this, and trust me, my family didn't, it was something that we all had different ideas about. But when we started to get together in our weekly sessions, we really were able to hear each other's perspectives. So establishing a family identity that is taught strategically and intentionally taught to new generations of the family. But probably the more impactful thing as far as spiritual wealth is concerned is family retreats. Business families and entrepreneurial dynasties, they do not have family reunions. They have family retreats, and there's a whole tax implication for that. That really is an advantage for these families because they're infusing the operation of the business into how their family connects with each other and stays connected. So that's our second form of wealth, spiritual wealth. Getting into the third form of wealth, we have a wealth of knowledge. Now, what does this mean? It means that you, as the entrepreneur in your family, and I will say this, you might find that your family has not yet healed enough to have these kinds of conversations. You might not have the deep enough relationships or connections to talk about your family identity. And that is okay because it could even just start with you. So if your family isn't close, if there's still unhealed trauma or there's pain and toxicity, then your responsibility, if you want to fund generational excellence down the generational chain, then you have the responsibility of writing out what your vision is for the family, of documenting what you understand the family identity to be, and even begin to put on paper your ideas for a family retreat different from a family reunion. So moving forward, getting into this third form of wealth, the wealth of knowledge, this is where you want to do your best to capture your family history. I want you to do some quick research on a concept called heirs property, HEIR property. And that's just like the person who inherits anything from you is your heir, right? And Black families, historically, we have lost billions of dollars of wealth and millions of acres of land because we did not know who owned it. There was no deed, there was no will. And that is because we have not been taking the time to capture our family history. So in the wealth of knowledge, we're capturing our family's history. We're learning everyone's lived experiences. And even again, going back to what entrepreneurial dynasties and these business families are doing, they have family councils. That means there's a leadership team within the family that isn't just responsible for planning the family reunions, but now we're moving to family retreats. The family council is really made up of the people who are committed to serving in this leadership position, to capture and retain the family history, but also who are focused on governance and helping to control and monitor how the family's wealth is being created, whether it's through entrepreneurship or real estate investing or investing in stocks or even alternative investments like gold and luxury watches. There's a family council that is made up of, people from different generations within the family that helps to perpetuate that. So that's our wealth of knowledge. The fourth form of wealth is intellectual wealth. And this is where we get to literally make an investment in the passion, in the skills, and in the abilities of people in our family because we've done the family history. We've captured the lived experiences. So now we have a better idea of how people want to serve, how people want to be seen, and how they want to show up in the world. And we get to invest in that as a family to help them reach mastery so that they can generate revenue and return the investment back to the family council and to the family wealth. So that's intellectual wealth. And it's this fifth form of wealth that really research has estimated, I'll say is the term, that Black and African American entrepreneurs generate typically 1/3 less revenue than our white counterparts because our social networks are weaker. We have less social capital. So if we are going to truly fund generational excellence within our families, relational wealth is going to be the missing piece. And what is that? That means that it's not just me networking, it's me and my daughter networking. I'm taking her to appropriate social events. I'm taking her to appropriate business development events. And I'm helping to model for her how she can build her own relationships with decision makers, with movers and shakers, and with influencers. And that expands our family's network and the strength of our family's relationships. So this is how entrepreneurial dynasties are perpetuating wealth. This is how ultra high net worth individuals are creating wealth that's passed down for 3, 5, and 7 generations. But this is not being taught in mainstream media or mainstream education. So just a really quick recap of how dynastic families are building wealth. They're establishing first that financial wealth, and that's through strategic pricing and profitability. They have this vision. They are envisioning spiritual wealth. They've discussed what they want the wealth to be for, what kind of freedom, access, and opportunities they want future generations to benefit from because of their work today. They record the wealth of knowledge. They have relationships within the family. They may not be the healthiest relationships, but they have these doors, these windows within the family that allow them to at least learn who was grandpa, what did he do to establish this business, and what was his experience as a business owner. So they're recording this wealth of knowledge and they're passing it down. And from there, they actually even are investing in intellectual wealth. You may know personally a handful of people that were in college with you that did not need a degree because there was already a job in the family business waiting for them. That family literally invested in that student's intellectual wealth because they knew that family member was coming back to the family business or coming back to the family council to build more wealth for the family. And then they also are really focused on relational wealth. Some might call it nepotism or favoritism, but if we had the opportunity to do so as Black and African American entrepreneurs, it'd be a shame if we didn't. Bringing along our nieces, nephews, sons, daughters, godchildren, everyone, bringing them along after they've been properly groomed, of course, and they're in appropriate spaces to create their own relationships. This is how dynastic families build wealth. But what this really means is if you've ever sat in on a business development workshop or listen to a YouTube training, and they're talking about tech this and venture fund that and lean startup the third, and you don't really feel like you're in the right place, it's because you're not. So the tech-enabled, venture-funded, and lean startup model for entrepreneurship training, it does not hold space for you. And I'm saying this as an entrepreneurship educator, as a certified business analyst, as an entrepreneur myself. That model is not built for the Black experience, and especially not built for what first generation Black wealth creators such as yourself and like me, it's not built. It doesn't have the space for what we require. So I really want to take just a couple of minutes to share this framework for funding generational excellence through dynastic wealth. And this is from the perspective of how do we contextualize it? How do we make it relevant for Black and African American entrepreneurs? So we talked, this is really it starts with this idea of I want to build a dynasty. I intend to build a dynasty. I intend to operationalize my business such that the wealth can be passed down for at least 3 generations, not just to my children, but to my grandchildren. And not just when my grandchildren are born, but I have a responsibility for grooming them and modeling for them and teaching them how to maintain and perpetuate this wealth. Now, that intent can only come from this place of wanting to be generative. So you hear the word almost like generosity in that, but generative, a generative script is this story, this narrative that's in your head and in your heart that says, to whom much is given, much is required. It says, I have the responsibility to do and create more, to create better for the future. Okay, so we start with dynastic intent, and from that comes this idea of your generative script. That is your personal narrative. That's the story that you say in your head. It's what gets you up in the morning. It's what keeps you going throughout the night. And it really produces this focus on financial wealth. So these are 5 forms of wealth again: financial wealth, spiritual wealth, the wealth of knowledge, intellectual wealth, and relational wealth. And you see here, these are all the different components that go into that. So like I said, it's a simple approach, but nobody said that it would be easy. But that's okay, because you're not in this by yourself. So I really want to kind of frame what this means for you as a Black entrepreneur, especially with the understanding and the acknowledgement that the regular business development and entrepreneurship training curriculum does not hold space for your experience as a Black entrepreneur. And that means that just like we're talking about equity in every other aspect of our lives, we need to be talking about equity, racial equity in entrepreneurship training. So when it comes to establishing that financial wealth, what I want to share is from my days as a certified business analyst with the Florida Small Business Development Center Network, I would always have clients who just did not feel like they could do it. They did not have the confidence or the esteem that says, I got this. I'm going to do this and I'm going to knock it out of the park. But there is a concept that is probably most likely responsible for this. And it comes from Dr. Joy DeGruy. She did some research and actually published a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And one of the constructs that comes out of post-traumatic slave syndrome is this idea of vacant esteem. So we've heard of self-esteem, low self-esteem, high self-esteem. Vacant esteem says that you don't believe that you can do it. And that's simply not true. So racially equitable entrepreneurship training would address that fear, that doubt, and that insecurity that often cripples us, that paralyzes us. And I have been a witness to that. That's been my own experience, and I have developed an approach to overcome that. So I look forward to sharing that with you. Also, regarding financial wealth, remember, this is not being taught in mainstream media or mainstream education. So don't think that you missed the news session on this, or that you maybe that was what they taught in class, that one day you didn't go to class. It's not being taught anywhere. There are racial inequities that are built into the American tax system. There's racism built into the American tax system, especially if you're looking at it from an employee side. Think as an entrepreneur, things are not as black and white, literally. Things are pretty much more straightforward for entrepreneurs, but we have to be exposed to those tax loops and know those tax advantages. Dorothy Brown is the author of The Whiteness of Wealth, and you can learn more about those racial inequities in American tax policies, especially as you're focusing on establishing financial wealth. Now, as far as spiritual wealth and envisioning spiritual wealth, what these dynastic families are doing and what Black entrepreneurs have to do, we have to incorporate succession planning into our business operations. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to build the business to pass it down to your children or nieces or godchildren. Succession planning doesn't even mean that your family has to be involved. Listen, at least not your blood relatives. Family is literally what you make it. And in envisioning spiritual wealth and funding generational excellence, you actually don't have to pass down the business. We're focusing more so on the wealth. Remembering again that the pricing and profitability of the business has to be strong in order for there to create any wealth to begin with. Going back to these family retreats, the book that I would recommend for you, either audiobook or digital physical copy, is Complete Family Wealth. This is where I was first introduced to the concept of a family retreat, a business-oriented family retreat that has tax write-offs as opposed to the family reunions that Black families often are hosting. So the next form, racially equitable entrepreneurship training that we need to incorporate, goes to this wealth of knowledge. And here again, not every family, especially not every Black family, there are some aunts, there are some grandmothers, there's some parents who just have so much pain, so much trauma that they cannot be bothered to answer your questions about their childhood. They won't react positively when you try to understand their logic about a decision that they've made. So this goes back to, this is a concept from post-traumatic slave syndrome as well. And it's referred to as ever-present anger. Now, this isn't the session to really kind of unpack this, but there is real research that shows that because of historical and generational trauma, Black families, especially Black matriarchs, are often angry because the lack of male protection, which we know is systemically induced, because of the fear of losing their family, again, racially induced. So there are some things that are at the heart of the situation, literally at the heart of the situation, that until there is healing, your family may not be able to have those discussions, and that is okay, because funding generational excellence can start with you today. Okay. So getting into investing in intellectual wealth, that takes us back to spiritual wealth. It takes us back to, what do we want the money to be used for? And how do we ensure that the passions, skills, and abilities of the members of our family that we're investing in those, and so that they develop mastery. They get to a level of mastery and expertise that again brings money back to the family trust, and back to the family council. And then finally, we have building relational wealth. That again is the social capital. That is creating these opportunities for leadership development, for relationship building, and even maybe apprenticeship through philanthropy and service. So this is what Black entrepreneurs can do. This is contextualized for historic oppression, for racism, for post-traumatic slave syndrome, and for the violence against Black bodies in general. This is what we need to focus on if we're going to fund generational excellence through Black dynastic wealth. And so just as a recap, generational excellence and dynastic wealth is a model. It's a model for wealth building that encompasses the lived experience and the ancestral narrative of you and I. You will not find racially equitable entrepreneurship training anywhere in mainstream media. You will not learn about entrepreneurial dynasties in a classroom, unless I'm there, right? But that is the gap that I am here to fill. And I look forward to being a part of that with you and for you. So again, funding generational excellence, it can begin with you today, and it can last into perpetuity with the right strategy and, of course, with the right guidance. So I have some resources available for you as far as funding generational excellence is concerned. There's a free checklist I want to make sure that you get access to. You can also sign up for one-on-one coaching or even for group business mentoring. And as we get deeper into this and make more headway as a people, I look forward to being of service to Black families and Black entrepreneurs and helping to establish their Black family wealth retreats. So you can get those resources at Meet Professor White, profwhite.com/FGE for funding generational excellence. And I look forward to you doing so that your grandchildren's grandchildren don't have to worry about.